give back the control to our presenters today, Nadina and Justin. Please take over from me and start this particular meetup with your introductions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ravi, for having us. And thank you so much for the warm welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. My name is Nadina Lisbon. I'm a Salesforce certified technical architect, a Salesforce MVP, a MuleSoft ambassador. And when I'm not doing Salesforce volunteering, I work at NetApp as an enterprise architect.
And hello, everybody. I'm Justin Lisbon. I'm a Salesforce technical architect at Vacasa.
And so together, what we'll be doing is unleashing possibilities one technology at a time.
And just to get started, we'll kind of go over just a quick business introduction of just the business that we're working on to get a solution in place. And so the business we're working with is just Streamline Solutions. They're a very long existing company. They have a lot of pre-built processes that at the time when they were built, years and years ago, were some of the most advanced that you could do at the time, but they've kind of fallen by the wayside. They're not scaling very well. They're starting to fall over. Things aren't working correctly. You got a lot of failures happening, processes going down, a lot of business impact that's affecting everybody, not only themselves, but their customers. And so they have a large initiative to move away from their current technology that's very point to point integrations, and they're trying to move to more of event style architecture. And so to do that, their IT team is kind of revamping their entire kind of back end systems to move towards this architecture. And so while doing that, they're working on a lot of downstream systems that'll make the biggest impact for both themselves and their customers. And they're going to be doing that for potentially years. And so the downside of that is that their sales organization, they're more of an upstream process, and they're not going to see some of these enhancements or innovations for potentially years. And they really need to get some improvements in their own process because they're doing a lot of manual work. They're trying to manually move data between systems. They're copying, pasting data. We know the problems with trying to manually do anything. They're losing data. They're copying, pasting data into the wrong fields. They're getting inaccurate data. They're just taking up a ton of their time that they really should be using for their sales and not really being focused on how the data gets from one point to another. They need to be focused on really their sales process and doing their day-to-day jobs. And so now that we kind of know about the business, our problem that we're working with would be that right now they're getting data funneled into a Google Sheet, and none of us would ever put business critical data into a Google Sheet, right? We'd never ever have that happen. And so they're trying to get that data that's really critical and business oriented, that's going to help their sales process. They need to get that automatically loaded into Salesforce. And then from Salesforce, they need to push that data into the event driven architecture that IT is already working with, which is AWS. And so they need to be able to do that quickly and easily from one system to another. But also, when they can get this data into the hands of IT will have to focus less on the sales process or trying to revamp what sales is doing and just consume that data in things they're already building with the event architecture. And so now that we kind of know about the business, what they do, what our problem is, what would be our solution, Adina?
So what we're going to do is we're going to bring in some powerful technologies. So if you see on the right, I have my external system. And what we're going to do is we're going to bring in MuleSoft Composer. What it's going to allow us to do is do a very quick point and click integration. That's right, point and click, no code required to connect our Google Sheets to Salesforce. Now we have these events and we need to get them into AWS, and we can use Amazon EventBridge. But what we also need to do is use Salesforce Event Relay. And this Event Relay technology will allow us to essentially stream these messages from Salesforce into Amazon EventBridge. Now, this partnership that Salesforce has with Amazon is very powerful. And so, what I'm going to do instead of talking all about this is actually go through it and show you step by step how we can set this up. So, with that, let me stop sharing my main screen. And then let me share, I'll say the most important screen. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So what we have here, high level, is I have quite a few tabs, so I'll walk through them. But let's start with MuleSoft Composer. So I have MuleSoft Composer here open for Salesforce. There's plenty of templates and documentation. But what I'm going to do is actually start with a new flow. And so the first thing we have to do when we're creating this MuleSoft flow, one, we should always start with the name. I typically forget, and then when I go to save, it will let me know that I need to have one. So I will say Google Sheets, Salesforce integration. And I just want to keep this as descriptive as possible. Now, what we want to do is choose an interaction. So we can have a system event where it will allow us to do a triggering event. So if you've worked in Salesforce, where you've worked with Apex and triggers, you understand that something has to happen. And we have our logic event where we can schedule something so we can have a job that runs. So in this case, what we'll do is do a system event. And you'll see here as I'm pulling up the MuleSoft Composer that there's tons of out of the box apps that we can connect to. So we don't need to write anything. So what I'm going to do is click on Google Sheets and we'll just call this Google Sheets. And what we'll actually do is go ahead and do our connection. Now, you might not see my box that popped up just now, depending on how it showed. But what I'm doing right now is just quickly authenticating to a Gmail that has my actual Excel document in it. So the first thing I want to do when I'm setting up this Google Sheet is I need to figure out what I want this event to be on. But before we can even talk about it, let me just go over and show you what the sheet looks like. So I have a sheet that is company data, and this is our typical lead data that sales needs to get into the system and they need to get it in as soon as possible. So we have our columns, first name, last name, email, company, and phone. And then I have another tab here, and this is just for me to keep sample data so that I can show you the integration happen in real time and not have to think so much. So we have our sheet of leads that we need to get into the system. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say for this event, since this sheet already exists, I just wanted to make updates on new rows. So I'm going to go ahead and click new row. Then what it's going to ask me is, which sheet are you looking for? So in this case, if you had a lot of Google Sheets in your drive, then it would have tons and tons in here. But Streamline Solutions only has one, which is this company data. And then it's just asking which tab I'm using. So we're going to be using the leads. So now what this is doing is it's going to grab that information, and now I need to tell it what fields from this Google Sheet I need to bring in. So I want to bring in company, email, first name, last name, and phone. We could bring in this other information if we need to, but I don't need it for this particular use case. So I'm going to go ahead and hit apply. Now, the next thing in our flow that we need to do here is we need to decide what should happen next. So we have, again, our interaction that we can do, or if we needed to make any changes to the Google Sheet, we could do some logic on it and perform some actions and even do for loop iterations. But in this case, very simple. I just want to take information from that Google Sheet into Salesforce. So I'm going to go ahead and hit system interaction, and then I'm going to go down here and choose Salesforce. Now you'll see that I've already authenticated with Streamline Solutions. So I'm going to go ahead and click that org. Now that I'm already in, what I need to say is what should happen in Salesforce specifically. So in this case, since I'm doing a new row on the sheet, what I wanted to do is create a new record. Then it's going to ask me a record on what. And so I want it to be on the lead. So I'm going to go ahead and hit lead. Now you'll see here that two fields have already come in, company and last name. These are required by Salesforce by default, but we want to bring in a bit more information. So what I'm going to do is do select additional information. And I'm just going to bring in the first name, email, and phone. Let me just make sure our first name came in properly. Perfect. So if I hit apply, what you'll see is I have the five that I need to do. So company, last name, email, first name, and phone. So what I'll do is now just map it to the rows that we already have. And as you're mapping it, just eyeballing to make sure you have it correctly. And in case you make a mistake, like you do first name and last name when you're looking, you can easily just close it out and then add it in as needed. So once all of that is good, I have my actions. I know what I want to do with this flow. What I want to do now is test. I want to make sure that when I truly add the Google, add a record from the Google Sheet, it is going to come into Salesforce. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to click test. And so what Composer is going to do is it's going to temporarily turn on this flow and it's going to wait for a triggering action. So it's actually going to create a record in our Salesforce org for us. So let's just give a minute. So you'll see here now that we have a countdown and it's waiting for an event to be triggered. So I'm going to go to that Google Sheet. I'm going to go to that sample data. I'm just going to pull that very first record that I was looking at. Then I'll add it right here. So now what I expect to happen is it's going to run through. It's going to see that this event came in, and then it's going to create a actual lead record for us. And I expect an ID to be outputted. So we'll wait a bit so that we can see that that is happening. All right, we have a success. So then what I'm going to do now is actually, I'm going to go into my Streamline Solutions org, which is this one. Just going to copy and paste that ID, and I'm going to make sure that that information is there. So you'll see that same lead that I just picked up is there and it's ready. So we know that that flow is working correctly. And so when testing out your composer, you can always add a sandbox so that you can test in. And then once you know that it's working, you can actually switch it out and just do your production. But in this case, everything looks good. And so what I'm going to do is activate. So that first part of the demo, getting the data from Google Sheets to Salesforce, easy peasy. That's the easy part. While this is activating, we need to now do the second part, which is how do we get that data that is in Salesforce in AWS? Because that's where the information really needs to lie. And that's where we're trying to get information to. So what we're going to do is we're going to do some work with Postman. So if you've used Postman before, then you know it's really good for doing API and endpoints. If this is the first time you're seeing Postman, don't worry. At the end of the demo, what we do have is a quick start so that you can do your Postman configuration. What I started with was the actual Salesforce Get repo cloning of that specific Postman collection. And so I have all the Salesforce events in here. And then I also built in the ones for the Salesforce event relay. So the first thing we need to do when we start with Postman is we need to actually get a new access token. I want to make sure that this org is correct. So we have the correct org. When we get to this access token, one of the things you have to do when you're setting it up is actually copy this instance URL and use token. So you'll go over to variables and you'll see something called an endpoint. You just want to make sure that you're setting that instance URL that you just got for your access token so that it's working correctly. So you'll see I have some other environment variables set like login, the version, and my client ID. So once that's working correctly, what I want to do now is I just want to check and see if everything is authenticated and we're actually in the org. So one of the methods that I typically use is the gets limit request. So I'm going to hit the get limit request for this specific org, and I'm just looking to make sure that it's actually working and everything is active. So once that's working and everything is good, now we can really start the demo. So what I've done in Postman is I've created essentially a folder and a few endpoints that we have to run through. And this is to actually set up the Salesforce event relay. So the first thing we have to do is we have to decide what we're going to do the event relay on, how we're going to do the events. So in this case, I'm going to be using change data capture, not platform events. And so the first thing you have to do is you have to actually set up the platform event channel. So what I'm doing here is you'll see that I'm hitting the endpoint platform events channel. And then I have some pre-configured information, the name, specifically the channel type, which is of type data, because I'm going to do a change data capture, and then just a label so that we know what it is. So I'm going to go ahead and hit send. So once that's been successful, now I need to create channel members. So in this case, because I'm using change data capture and I'm working on leads, Salesforce has an out of the box change event for leads, and it's called lead change event. So this is standard out of the box. And so we're going to utilize that so that we can send these events. And so here again, you'll see that I'm hitting the platform events channel member, which is the endpoint for creating a channel member for that channel we just created, adding a name, the event channel, which is the one we just created, and then specifically the entity is the lead change event. So what that's going to do is add our lead change event to that channel that we just created. Now the next step is creating a name credential. And there's a couple ways we can do this. There's an endpoint already pre-configured, or we could actually go into Salesforce. So just to show you what it would look like in Salesforce is we'll go to setup, and then under security, or you can type in name credentials. You'll see here that we can do our request. So I do have my name credential already created, but I want to show you how that credential is going to work. So you have the full name, you have the metadata. Now this particular endpoint, this information, how you create this endpoint is the first part is our AWS. The second part here is the actual region. So what region we're located in. And then we have to put in our customer ID. Now to get that information, just gonna pop over to AWS really quick, and you'll see that the region I'm in is US East North. And then under my name, I have my account ID. So I use all that information, and that will create that name credential for me. So I won't go ahead and hit this endpoint again because I already have it created. I'm actually going to now go to create the event relay. So what this event relay is going to do is actually for our events so that we can start doing our change data capture events. And they're going to use that specific endpoint and the name credential that I already have created. So I'm going to hit the event relay config, and again, have the name, have the destination resource, which is my call out, my relay name credential, which was that name credential I had, and then the event channel that I created earlier. So now that we have a success here, we need to actually copy this ID because we're going to be using it for the rest of the demo. So let me make sure I copy it correctly. So
Hey,
once we
Nadina.
have the event,
Yeah.
sorry, was there a question?
Yes, Nadina. So I believe that whatever you're trying to do right now, creating a channel, creating a lead relay, etc., those are
Mhm.
one-time activities, right?
Yes, these are going to be one-time activities. So once you get this all up and running, you will always have these change data capture events on leads. But because this is a, let's say, first-time installation, I wanted to show everyone how to do it that very first time.
Cool. And my second question is that, like, you create name credentials on the Salesforce UI itself, can you
Mhm.
also create this channel and relays uh, through the UI?
So for the channel and relays, you have to use a tool like Postman to hit the endpoints. You unfortunately can't create them through the Salesforce UI. And so you can use any API tool that you want to use, but I chose to use Postman to create them.
Understood. Thank you for clarifying that.
Okay, so great questions. Now, once we have this event relay config and created, what we're going to do now is a couple things. So what is happening in the background is it's going to create a remote source for us in AWS. So what I'm actually going to do here, this is a query that I've pre-created. And all this information, these endpoints I'm hitting, this description I'm putting in, all of this is in our resources at the end of the presentation. So you'll be able to do all of this as well. So what I'm doing is setting that event relay config ID that I had before. Now I could make this a environment variable, but again, this is like a one-time setup. So I'm just checking to see specifically that this remote resource is going to be available when we go over to AWS. So I'm not going to copy it because I have Postman open, but I'll show you where we need to actually start that in AWS when we get there. So the last part of the event relay is actually now started. So it doesn't start in a run state, it is just waiting. And so you'll see here for the endpoint, I need to replace it with that event relay config that I created earlier. So once I hit send, theoretically now any events or any changes that are happening on leads will start sending. But we haven't configured the AWS to make sure that it's going to now receive them. So we're still a bit in the middle. So I'm going to pop over now to AWS EventBridge. So high level, this is Amazon EventBridge. And what we need to do when we're in our event bus is we need to go to our partner event resources, and you'll see that same remote resource that I was talking about, and notice that it's pending. It's not associated with any event buses yet. So what I'm going to do is associate it with the event bus and hit associate. So you'll see now it's active and it's ready to go. So next, what I need to do is to show you the logs. We could stop here because at this point, this is now where we're getting into IT's territory, but we're all technical people. So I want to show you how you can actually see these logs in AWS. So we're going to set up a simple rule. So that event bus that I just activated earlier, you'll notice it's now in the drop down, ready to go. And then I'm going to go ahead and create a rule. So let's go ahead and call it lead event. And I won't add any description, so I'll just hit next here. We're going to leave the event source as AWS events or EventBridge partners. We're going to leave the AWS events there. We're going to leave the use pattern form, but down here, we need to say EventBridge partners. And specifically, we need to select Salesforce. So once we select Salesforce, we can say what type. And again, because I'm using lead, I can go ahead and select lead. And so you'll notice in the event pattern, the lead change event, it's using that same standard change data capture that I had from before. So that looks good. Then we'll hit next. Now for our select target, we need to do our Cloud Hub watch log group. And then we just need to give it a path. So I'll say lead events slash logs. So AWS service still the same, and then just our Cloud Watch log group. Then we're going to go ahead and hit next, next, and make sure everything looks good and create a rule. So now that we have that rule created, I'm just going to go ahead and click on it and then hit on targets and then actually hit on logs. So it's going to open up one more tab for us. So now theoretically, any changes that come in or any changes that are happening will come in here. So we don't have any changes yet. So now let's go back and see the entire flow end to end. So we'll go over here and we can see that Composer is active. And let's actually start this whole demo now from end to end. So I have my lead that I'm copying. I'm moving it in and adding it to the Google Sheet. What's going to happen is in a little bit, Composer is going to run and we're going to see a success history. So we'll wait a little bit for it to pick up. So we'll see that success. Now, just to make sure that we do have that lead, I'll just go ahead and search it in Salesforce. We'll see that lead that was created. Now, if we go over to AWS, what we should have is some logs coming in. So the first one is typically more of the setup and getting everything going. So you'll see that, hey, there were some updates. But the second one is what we're more interested in because that will actually show all the information that comes across from our change data capture event. So you'll see end to end now that we were able to get that lead that we just moved across. So let me just stop sharing now and go back into our demo. Okay. And so, high level, what I just showed you was I took a very manual process and I was able to automate it. So, I went from Google Sheets to Salesforce using MuleSoft Composer. And then I went from Salesforce to Amazon using both Salesforce Event Relay and Amazon EventBridge, and was able to integrate across all of them. No code, just point and click. And what this allowed us to do was, one, if the business comes back today and they say, I need to update that Google Sheet, or I need to add more information, or they need to create another Google Sheet on leads, all they have to do is change the composer side of the house to update the Google Sheet or make any changes that they need necessary in Salesforce. All those events are going to go directly to Amazon via Salesforce Event Relay and AWS Event Bridge. So we allow the business to make any changes for now, as well as be able to make changes in the future. And what that has done is freed up IT. So now IT can focus on those really critical business processes, and they know that they're going to get the information they need. So whatever they're using across the AWS ecosystem, they can send that data to any data warehouse or any information that they need to send it across to. And then importantly, through point and click, we were able to unleash the power of MuleSoft Composer and Amazon EventBridge. So if you would like to stay up to date, learn more about these technologies, do join the MuleSoft community on Trailhead, where you can learn best practices, review resources, ask questions, share your experience. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we have, and you'll get this in the deck, a trail mix that has in Postman, it has information about Composer, it has information about our Salesforce Event Relay, and I actually linked the Salesforce Event Relay documentation so that you can look at it. And with that, I wanted to say thank you. And if there are any additional questions, looking forward to take those as well. So let me bring up the screen.
Yes, you can now come off mute, and if you have any questions, feel free to raise them. I had one question, Nadina. So when
Mhm.
you're calling Salesforce APIs,
Mhm.
uh, that so those Salesforce platform APIs themselves would create a Amazon Bridge bus record, right, inside the AWS account, right?
Yes, so those records that I sent, they're directly getting streamed across to AWS. So you can do whatever you want to do. So this use case specifically, I know a lot of folks work with the Amazon side, but the question is always, how do we get the data out of Salesforce? Because we're not working in Salesforce, we're working in Amazon. And so what this allows us to do is the people who want to work in Salesforce, they can work in Salesforce. And the people who need the information in AWS, that information can now come across the AWS.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
perfect.
on the back end, when you're doing all that setup on the Salesforce side for all the event relays, the event channel, all that good stuff, the connection that Salesforce has made with AWS, it's creating the stuff on the AWS side. You just have to when you go to AWS, you just have to associate it with the bridge because
Okay,
it's setting it up, but it's not activating it for you. But it will do like the connection between Salesforce and whatever your AWS account is. It's doing a lot of that work for you, but then it just wants you to associate it to the right place in AWS.
got it. Thanks for clarifying that, Justin. Absolutely, Manik. Definitely learned a lot today, new today. Thank you for doing that. One last opportunity to see if anyone has any other questions or feedbacks about the presentation.
This Crystal is a great presentation. Thank you very much, Nandita. And yeah, thank you. So it's very, very helpful. Sorry about that. So is one question is how to get access to Microsoft Composer if we're the partner.
Yeah, so if you are a partner, you can raise a case in the partner community to specifically ask for Composer. So, Crystal, I can follow up with you if you need help
Okay.
there from like the partner side. Hmm.
Okay. Thank you
Yeah,
so much. Yeah.
Crystal, that's the best approach. You can reach out to your partner manager from the MuleSoft, and then they'll get you not just the way to get the composer entitlement, but the other entitlements that you're looking forward to as well.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Okay. Okay. One last question, if anyone has it. I think no one has any further questions. So that should be all. Thank you so much, Nadina and Justin, for taking out time today, for being present here and presenting an awesome presentation as well as a fantastic demo on how to solution